The Pacific sun rose red over the horizon on June 4, 1942, casting a molten glow upon the endless stretch of blue water. The ocean was deceptively calm, hiding beneath its shimmering surface a storm of steel and fire about to be unleashed. For months, the Imperial Japanese Navy had swept across the Pacific, striking blow after blow against Allied forces. But now, at a tiny atoll called Midway, destiny waited. The trap. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed he had devised the perfect ambush. His plan was elegant: lure the remaining American carriers into the open seas, destroy them, and secure Japan's dominance in the Pacific. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, sailed with their escorts, brimming with aircraft and confidence. But Yamamoto did not know that American cryptographers had broken his code. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, calm and calculating, positioned his own carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the battered USS Yorktown, north of Midway. The hunters were walking into the hunted snare. Midway's defenders. At dawn, Japanese bombers streaked toward Midway Atoll. Sirens wailed as Marines scrambled to anti-aircraft guns. Pilots of the Marine Air Group 221 launched their worn-out Buffaloes and Wildcats, climbing desperately to intercept. Captain John Carey gritted his teeth as tracer rounds cut across the sky. His outdated Buffalo shook under the recoil of his guns as he tore into a formation of bombers. But the Japanese Zeros were merciless. One by one, American fighters were shredded, smoke trailing across the heavens. Carey's wingmen burst into flames, crashing into the sea. Despite the sacrifice, Midway's defenses inflicted wounds. The airstrip was cratered, fuel tanks ablaze, but the island still stood. Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8. On the decks of the USS Hornet, Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron gathered his men of Torpedo Squadron 8. They knew the odds. Their slow, under-armored devastators would have to fly straight into swarms of Zeros to release their torpedoes. "Remember," Waldron said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest, "our mission is to hit the carriers. Even if we don't come back, others will finish the job. Stay together, and God bless you all." 30 minutes later, they were in the air, engines droning, the ocean glinting beneath them. When the Japanese carriers came into view, towering against the horizon, Waldron led the dive. Zeros swooped down like hawks, ripping through the devastators. Planes exploded in fireballs, spiraling into the sea. Waldron's own craft was shredded, plunging into the waves. Of the 15 planes, not a single one returned. But their sacrifice would prove decisive. The tide turns. High above the battle, dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown searched desperately. Their fuel was low, pilots sweating inside cockpits. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing at full speed. He reasoned it must be rejoining the fleet. Trusting his instincts, McCluskey followed, and soon the Japanese carriers emerged from the haze. At that exact moment, fate favored the Americans. The Japanese decks were cluttered with fueled planes and bombs, as they had just rearmed for a second strike on Midway. McCluskey's voice crackled over the radio, "All right, boys, attack." The dauntless dive bombers plunged. The sky turned into a cathedral of death. Bombs screamed downward, striking with apocalyptic force. Kaga erupted into a pillar of fire, fuel tanks igniting. Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, was pierced by a single bomb that set off secondary explosions, flames devouring the flight deck. Moments later, Soryu was ripped apart, fire sweeping through its hangars. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's carriers, once symbols of invincibility, were burning wrecks. Yorktown under siege. But the battle was far from over. Hiryu, the last Japanese carrier, launched waves of counterattacks. Dive bombers descended upon the USS Yorktown. Captain Elliot Buckmaster maneuvered furiously, but 2 bombs slammed into the deck, sending fire roaring through the ship. Damaged crews fought valiantly, extinguishing flames and restoring power. By sheer grit, Yorktown was back in action, until a second wave of torpedo planes struck. Explosions ripped through her hull, engines failing. Listing badly, Yorktown finally had to be abandoned. Yet her sacrifice drew the fury of Hiryu, leaving the other American carriers untouched. The death of Hiryu. As the sun dipped low, Enterprise and Hornet launched their final strike. Dive bombers soared over the ocean, engines straining. Lieutenant Richard Best led his squadron straight at Hiryu. Anti-aircraft fire turned the air into a storm of shrapnel, but the Dauntless pressed on. Best released his bomb from 2,000 feet. It struck Hiryu's midsection, detonating the hangar below. Flames raced across the deck as more bombs smashed into her. Hiryu staggered, black smoke curling into the sky. By evening, she was a drifting inferno, her crew abandoning ship into the dark Pacific waters. The Japanese counterattack was broken. Aftermath of fire and steel. When night fell, the Pacific was littered with burning hulks and oil slicks. Thousands of Japanese sailors clung to debris as sharks circled. The once proud carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, were gone, four of Japan's best. In contrast, the Americans had lost only Yorktown and a handful of planes. Admiral Yamamoto, his plan shattered, ordered retreat. For the first time, Japan's advance had been halted. On Enterprise, exhausted pilots stumbled from their cockpits. McCluskey, his face blackened with smoke, looked across the deck littered with bullet holes and oil stains. "We were lucky today," he muttered. But deep down, he knew it was more than luck. It was the courage of men like Waldron and his doomed Torpedo Squadron, the grit of Yorktown's crew, and the daring instincts of pilots who risked everything. The human cost. At Midway Atoll, Marines buried their dead beneath simple wooden crosses. Captain Carey, one of the few Marine pilots to survive, sat silently beside the graves. He thought of his wingmen, of the Devastator crews who never returned, of the sailors lost with Yorktown. Victory had come at a cost paid in young lives. In Tokyo, news of the defeat was concealed at first, but whispers spread. For the first time, the invincible empire had bled. In Washington, Nimitz delivered his report with characteristic brevity. Midway was a victory. Our pilots and sailors did their duty. Yet behind the understatement lay a truth. The tide of war had shifted. Legacy of Midway. The Battle of Midway would be remembered as the turning point of the Pacific War. Japan lost 4 carriers, hundreds of planes, and irreplaceable veteran crews. The United States, though bloodied, had seized the initiative. From then on, the Japanese would fight defensively, retreating step by step across the Pacific. For the men who fought, Midway was not an abstract victory but a crucible of fire and sacrifice. Some survived, haunted by the faces of lost comrades. Others gave everything in the skies above the ocean, never to be found again. Their courage, immortalized in the waves, ensured that freedom in the Pacific had not been extinguished. The climax, a sky aflame. In the final moments of June 4th, the horizon glowed orange with the flames of dying carriers. Japanese sailors stood on the decks of destroyers, watching helplessly as their mighty fleet sank into the depths. On the American side, pilots who had gambled with death sat in silence, the weight of survival pressing on them. The battle was more than a clash of steel and fire, it was a duel of resolve, strategy, and sacrifice. And in that duel, at Midway, the United States had seized the future. The ocean swallowed the wrecks, but the echoes of the battle remained, carried on every wave that lapped against the atoll. Midway was not just a victory, it was the moment the Pacific War changed forever. Closing reflection. The Battle of Midway was short, just a few days, but its impact stretched across history. It was the triumph of intelligence, courage, and chance. Men who had no certainty of return still flew, fought, and died so that the fleet might survive. When the sun set on June 7, 1942, the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. The Japanese tide was halted, and the long, bloody road to Tokyo had begun. Their sacrifice became legend, their courage etched into eternity. Midway was not merely a battle won, it was the beginning of victory.